Well, good evening. This evening we're going to read the poems of John Donne, who was one of the greatest poets of the Elizabethan and Jacobean period. He was almost an exact contemporary of Shakespeare. He was born 1572 and died a little later in 1631. But what is remarkable about him is, two things that I thought I would emphasize at the beginning. One is that John Donne's poems circulated in manuscript. They were not printed in his lifetime, and they circulated in manuscript on a scale which is off the scale of anybody else in the period. There are some 4,000 manuscripts in which there is at least one John Donne poem. So they were popular beyond your wildest dreams. And I think it's interesting to think of them as being read among circles of friends. Michael Drayton referred to them, John Donne and his fellow poets, not as the much later title, 2 centuries later was invented, the metaphysical poets. This is very much a late construction, but he referred to them as the chamber poets. So poets who read their poems in a small coterie, we'd use the French word, small group of friends. The other thing that I think one has to know about Donne is that he was a great nephew of Sir Thomas More. And this was a very big part of his background. So he came from the family of the first martyr of the Elizabethan period. Sir Thomas More was martyred for standing against the supremacy of the king and the king's divorce from Catherine of Aragon. And he was executed in July 1535, and his descendants, whenever they're mentioned in works of the time, it's always mentioned that they're a relative of Thomas More. And John Donne's mother, great niece of More, Elizabeth Donne, went with the young John Donne when he was 12 to visit her Jesuit brother in the Tower of London, where he was imprisoned. And John Donne, as a boy of 12, spent a whole day with Jasper Hayward, who'd been arrested and tortured. And he was with the then head of the Jesuit mission in England, William Weston, in disguise as one of Elizabeth Donne's relatives. So the whole day must have been absolutely terrifying for this boy. And not long later, when Donne was training for the law at Lincoln's Inn, his brother Henry, who was only a year younger than he was arrested for having a priest in his room. And the priest was a man called William Harrington. And Henry Donne was tortured until he admitted that it was a priest in his room, when the torturer, Richard Young, flung him into prison, another prison called Newgate, where there was a plague raging, and Henry Donne died. And that is the year in which John Donne decided to conform. And this is a very big feature of his life. John Carey, in a fascinating book, argued that John Donne's desire for oneness, for unity, whether with women or with God, came out of this experience of dislocation in this period, this sense of being cut off and being cut off from himself. And he describes his background in a short sentence that I'll read to you. He said, "I had my first breeding and conversation with men of suppressed and afflicted religion, accustomed to the despite of death and hungry of an imagined martyrdom." And that sense of being part of an afflicted minority comes across in a poem of his that isn't very well known, Satire 4, where he describes being in London, and in a London which is almost like one of Conrad's vision of London in The Secret Agent, a sort of phantasmagoric hell. And he meets a man who looks like a priest, dressed in black, but turns out to be very obviously a spy. And this spy gives him all the latest news, trying to evoke some truths out of Donne himself. And Donne, as he listens to this catalogue of gossip about the court, says in a very telling phrase, "I'm more amazed than Circe's prisoners when they felt themselves turn beasts, felt myself then becoming traitor, felt myself then becoming traitor." And I think that's a very, very strong sense in Donne that he'd had in some ways to suppress a part of himself. And that comes through, I think, in some of these really beautiful poems. They're some of the most beautiful poems in English. Now, the poems are now, in modern editions and ever since 1633, when they were first published, divided into songs and sonnets and divine poems. And we're going to stick to that formula this evening. So I'll read first some of the love songs, and probably one of the greatest love poems in English is the Good-Morrow, the Good Morning, the Good-Morrow. It's an aubade, therefore it's very much in the tradition of lovers, a poem about lovers waking up. But Ben Jonson said of Donne that he was the first poet in the world in some things, the first poet in the world in some things. And one of the things is that he's a poem of mutual love. Most of his love poems are not, as in traditional in love poems, poems beseeching the love of a rejecting lover, but poems celebrating togetherness, oneness of two people, mutual love. The Good-Morrow. I wonder by my troth what thou and I did till we loved. Were we not weaned till then, but sucked on country pleasures childishly? Or snorted we in the seven sleepers' den? 'Twas so. But this all pleasures fancies be. If ever any beauty I did see, which I desired and got, 'twas but a dream of thee. And now, good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. For love, all love of other sights controls, and makes one little room and everywhere. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone. Let maps to other worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world. Each hath one and is one. My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres, without sharp north, without declining west? Whatever dies was not mixed equally. If our two loves be one, or thou and I love so alike that none do slacken, none can die. You'll notice that there's the same dramatic impetus as you find in Shakespeare, the same desire to make poetry close to the world of ordinary speech and conversation. That's why I think they made good poems to read out in groups, these coteries. Now it was the second poem I'm going to read is The Anniversary, celebrating the first year, the end of the first year of their love. And it's got one of the greatest lines in Donne at the end of the first stanza, where instead of using the pentameter, he's using the rest of the stanza, he turns to the hexameter to emphasize how long their love is lasting for, going on and forever. The Anniversary. All kings and all their favorites, all glory of honors, beauties, wits, the sun itself, which makes times as they pass, is elder by a year now than it was when thou and I first one another saw. All other things to their destruction draw. Only our love hath no decay. This no tomorrow hath, nor yesterday. Running, it never runs from us away, but truly keeps his first, last, everlasting day. Two graves must hide thine and my course. If one might, death were no divorce. Alas, as well as other princes, we who prince enough in one another be, must leave at last in death these eyes and ears, oft fed with true oaths and with sweet salt tears. But souls where nothing dwells but love, all other thoughts being inmates, then shall prove this, or a love increased there above, when bodies to their graves, souls from their graves remove. And then we shall be throughly blessed. But we know more than all the rest. Here upon earth we are kings, and none but we can be such kings, nor of such subjects be. Who is so safe as we, where none can do treason to us except one of us two? True and false fears let us refrain, let us love nobly and live and add again years and years unto years, till we attain to write 80. This is the second of our reign. Wonderful playing with hyperbole and bathos right at the end of that. The third of these love poems that it read is called a valediction forbidding mourning, a valediction of farewell, a goodbye, forbidding mourning. And it is said to have been written when Donne was going abroad on an embassy and written to his wife. This is what his biographer, first biographer, Isaac Walton, tells us, but we don't know whether this is the case or not. But whatever is the case, it's a wonderful example of John Donne, as it were, a kind of mini drama where he's trying to persuade his beloved that he's not really going away, he's not going to be parted, he's not going to be separated. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, whilst some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say, no. So let us melt and make no noise no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant, but trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Dull, sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we by our love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less, eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such will thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness draws my circle just, and makes me end where I begun.